Hi there and welcome. My name is Chris Mowat and this is the second installation of my presentation, Simple Tools for Advanced Renderings. I'm a mechanical engineer with 7.5 years experience working as a SOLIDWORKS VAR engineer. In that time, I've become a SOLIDWORKS Elite Application Engineer, which just means I'm certified on a whole plethora of different areas of the software, but my true passion is rendering and animation. So over the years, I've become an expert in this animation and rendering with SOLIDWORKS Visualize. I've presented on it numerous times here at the conference and elsewhere. And what I'd like to do today is share the second edition of this presentation with you, and I've broken it up into 5 categories. So the categories are going to begin with importing, how we get the model from SOLIDWORKS into Visualize. Then it's going to be appearance, how we can manipulate and adjust materials on the model so that they look real. Then we'll look at light, how to get that perfect lighting condition so the rendering looks the way we want. Then we'll talk about cameras, so that we know how to set up the camera in the correct position and get the desired angle. And then finally, we'll finish up with some animation and show you just how easy it is to use all of the tools available to us to put together a fantastic animation in very little time using Visualize Professional. So let's get started. Everything begins with importing the files to Visualize. We need to get the 3D file from wherever it is. In this case, we're talking about SOLIDWORKS, and we need to get it into Visualize to begin our rendering. So there are 2 methods that we'll cover. The first one is going to be exporting directly from SOLIDWORKS to a Visualize format. Now, we achieve that by using the Visualize add-in directly in SOLIDWORKS, and that add-in gives us a tab on the command manager where we can export in one of 2 methods. Those methods include Export Simple and Export Advanced. Export Simple simplifies the model when it gets over to Visualize for a faster experience of applying materials. Let's go ahead and take a look. So here we are in SOLIDWORKS. I've got the Visualize add-in enabled, and we can now access the Export Simple and Export Advanced options. Let's go ahead and use the Export Simple. This will provide the fastest experience of adding materials to the model when we get it over to Visualize. The way that this Export Simple functions is it will group all of the parts together that have the same appearance within an assembly. So, if we have a bunch of hardware, nuts and bolts, that all have the same appearance, they'll be grouped together as one when we get into Visualize. And that helps. It helps a lot because if we need all of them to stay the same color, they will, but also we can easily change their color all together and all at once. That may not be the option you want to go with, so we need to explore how that actually impacts our experience here in Visualize. I'll go ahead and expand our model tree. So it's a good opportunity to talk about what the differences are between these icons. We have selection modes in Visualize. The first one here is Model. It's indicated by a yellow cube. That is the overall model, and when I use this mode, it will let me access the properties of the entire model. We've also got Part. Parts are blue. Parts actually sit within groups, and at this point, if I click on Part, we'll see all of the parts highlight on the screen. Now, what are these parts? If I go ahead and click on one of these, we can see it actually highlights right here, and we can see previews as well. So all of these parts are actually labeled based on the appearances that had been applied in SOLIDWORKS. We can go through and just hide a few of these to take a look inside. I can hide them on the screen as well. Now what we'll do is take a closer look right up at the front. So being the simple export method, when we click on a component and we see multiple highlighted at the same time, that means that they had the same appearance in SOLIDWORKS. And that also means that inside Visualize, we can add an appearance to one of them and it will apply to all. That is how Export Simple functions. If you want to be able to add individual appearances to these instances, then we have to use the Export Advanced. Let's go ahead and take a look at the Export Advanced because it also allows for a few other options that we'll be taking advantage of. The other option within the Visualize add-in is to Export Advanced. And Export Advanced creates a more similar feature tree inside Visualize, which allows us to have more specific control over individual components when adding appearances. Let's go take a look now. Now back in SOLIDWORKS, let's take a look at Export Advanced. If you have SOLIDWORKS Visualize Professional, you can export a motion study, but we're going to go ahead and bypass that for now. So as this opens, SOLIDWORKS Visualize is going to treat this imported assembly more like it exists in SOLIDWORKS than it did when we imported it with the simple method. And what I mean by that is we'll be able to control the appearance on each individual instance of any component within the assembly, regardless if they have the same appearance applied or not. This is going to let us have complete control over those appearances of each individual piece of hardware that in the previous example were grouped together. So let's take a look at the Models tab now that we've imported this with the advanced method. We can see the model, which has the yellow cube. We've got our first group, which is indicated by a purple cube, and then inside that are many more groups, whereas last time they were named after the materials and they were parts. This time they're groups and they're named after the parts and subassemblies. So you can again see previews here. We can again change to a selection mode that uses groups. So if I click here, you'll see it cross-highlight. We can again hide them the same exact way we did prior, and we can continue and hide from the screen the same way. Moving up close on this now though, if I click on these, they independently highlight. So that's an indicator that when I come over and I add another appearance the same way that I had before, I'll be able to add them independently. So that is how it's done. The same is the case for the screws that were previously all connected and received the same appearance. So if I want, I can intermingle the appearances between the different instances. That gives me the full control over every component in a way that you're more familiar with being able to do in SOLIDWORKS. Using the SOLIDWORKS Visualize add-in directly within SOLIDWORKS to get those models over to Visualize is a great method for doing it. But you should also know that you can open SOLIDWORKS files directly from Visualize, so essentially the other direction, pulling the files in. And when we do that, we have a similar, or exactly similar, two methods that we would import. One is going to mimic exactly how the Export Simple functions, and one will mimic exactly how the Export Advanced functions. Let's take a look. Here on the Visualize Home window, we can go ahead and open up SOLIDWORKS files directly by clicking right here on Open Project. There's a variety of file types that you can open directly into Visualize, but here we're just going to select the same assembly that we had open and exported from SOLIDWORKS. When we're in Visualize though, we get a secondary window before we actually open it, and this is giving us the opportunity to choose a part grouping. Right now it's set to Appearance. Appearance is the equivalent of the Export Simple from SOLIDWORKS. It's going to group those parts together that have the same appearance in the assembly. We'll go ahead and keep that on, but another noteworthy aspect of this window is the fact that we have the option to include cameras, the scene, and the decals that come from SOLIDWORKS. They all always come over when you export from SOLIDWORKS. Here we have a choice. We'll go ahead and click OK, and again this is going to be the equivalent of exporting simple from SOLIDWORKS. We can prove that by coming back up to our model tree and investigating the layout. And it's exactly the same as when we exported it in the simple method. So now let's take a look at the other method that now would be equivalent to the Export Advanced in SOLIDWORKS. I'll go ahead and close this file and we'll reopen it. We'll go to Open Project. I'll choose the same file and open it. But this time I'm going to choose a different method. This method is going to be automatic. Now what automatic is the equivalent to Export Advanced. It's going to treat all the parts individually so that I can add appearances individually, and it gives me an additional option to automatically re-import the file when the source changes. So essentially, we can monitor changes that happen in SOLIDWORKS, and it's only possible when you export advanced, or what we're seeing here, which is equivalent, choosing the part grouping automatic mode. We'll go ahead and click OK, and then we'll look at the model tree and prove that this is the exact same thing as exporting advanced from SOLIDWORKS. So we've gotten our starting points settled. Let's take a look back at our next steps. Let's do a quick recap of these import methods, and I promise the conversation will be over. In SOLIDWORKS with the add-in, we can export simple. That is equivalent to when we're in Visualize and we open a file and choosing the appearance part grouping mode. In the SOLIDWORKS add-in, if we were to export advanced, that is equivalent to when we open a SOLIDWORKS file and Visualize and we use the automatic part grouping. Awesome. With that set, we can now talk about appearances. So appearances are a huge part of what goes into creating a great rendering. Now, choosing the right appearance is important, but also knowing where to find those appearances and the differences between them is also very important. Because SOLIDWORKS Visualize comes with a library full of appearances that are categorized by different types used in different scenarios. For instance, we've got things like metal, glass, we've got emissives that are for light sources, right? There's plastic, there's a lot. So ultimately, choosing the right appearance is a stylistic choice, but let's take a look into how we can use appearances to make the model that we have look that much better. Let's carry forward using the model that we imported using the automatic mode, which allows us to individually add appearances to all the instances. So from here, we'll take a look at the appearances that already exist on the model. You have selection modes. Appearance selection is automatically turned on when we enable the tab for appearance, but you can always come right down here and choose it. This allows me to select and see the properties of the appearances and also cross-highlight which of those appearances are selected. You can do it this way too, and it will show that all of these are applied. Click here, you can see that there's a part in the middle, two of them actually, that have that red applied. So we're not stuck with these appearances. These are the ones that came from SOLIDWORKS. And in a lot of cases, they're good enough as far as passing the visual quality test. But sometimes we need more. We need more detail, we need higher quality. So that's why we have the library for appearances within Visualize. This library is full of appearances that are categorized and organized into folders. These folders contain appearances that are set to different types, and these types come with options that allow them to be dialed in to look more lifelike and match the appearances that you're after. So for instance, we'll go back into metal, and we have a black powder. Now this is more than just a shiny metal. I can drag over gunmetal and show you that. Right? That's just very shiny. Black powder comes with a texture, and it gives the illusion of bumps on the surface. And you can see that right there. Now, when we have appearances that have textures, you can select them, and we can take a look at this texture property. Now, I'll click on gunmetal first, and you'll see that there is no texture listed anywhere. These are placeholders, but they don't have any textures loaded. I click on black powder, and that's not the case. I have a bump map that says splatter normal. This is what's giving me that realistic powdery look. I can copy paste these appearances between parts by holding the shift key, left clicking on the one I want to copy, and then right clicking on where I want to paste. But you might notice just immediately that there's a difference slightly in the look between these two components. That has to do with the appearance scale. So each individual component can have its own appearance scale. So you could have a wood grain get smaller on a smaller part and bigger on a bigger part. In this case, we don't want them to be different, so let's just set those scales equal. I've got one right here. Let's check on the scale. You go over to Texture Mapping, and it tells me that the scale is 0.2696. Let's go ahead and just make this 0.25. Alright, now I'll choose this one, and we can see why it was not matching. It's very low. I'll change that to 0.25. And now you cannot tell that those are different. Let's repeat this for the rest of the components that are going to receive this appearance. And I'll also just make sure, when I select all three of these, that we have the proper scale. So 0.25, 0.25, and finally our last one right here, 0.25. Now, once all of them have the same scale, and in a lot of cases you're not going to have to worry about that, but once they all do have the same scale, there's one other property in the appearances that's good to know about as far as the texture is concerned. When you click on the texture that is enabled, we can change what's called the tiling. Now, the tiling is how many times we are repeating this little square that shows this texture. So if I decrease that to 5, for instance, you'll notice that it gets bigger. If I go the opposite way, I go 15, it'll get smaller. Now, what's the difference between doing this and changing it on this tab? Well, the difference is this is per part when we're on the texture mapping tab. Whereas when we do it here, this affects every single part that has the appearance applied. Another cool thing we can do now that we have this all as an appearance is we can right-click, hide, and select hide, and it will hide all of those. Now these are the cosmetic thread appearances. I don't need these right now. I'll actually just add black powder to it and hide these. We're not getting uptight on those holes, so it doesn't really matter if I have a thread graphic. But now we have a few other appearances that we need to apply. We've got some metals and other things happening right here. This right here, if I click on it and go to General, shows that this is a plastic. Now, it doesn't matter if it's a plastic in real life or if it's a paint, as long as it looks correct. And this doesn't look too bad at all. But there are a lot of properties that come with these plastic appearance types. You can see all of them right here. I could choose to go to the library and drag over another type of appearance, or you could just edit the appearance type that came over from SOLIDWORKS. So for instance, I can click on Paint. And with Paint, you have the option for clear coat and a roughness for that clear coat. We also have just a color, and with color, we can do HSV or RGB values, and we can select and make it whichever we want. We can also use a dropper, a color picker, if we had some Pantone chart or something else we could reference. But this is looking pretty good. So now let's go ahead and make sure the rest of our appearances are dialed in. I'm noticing that we have just some gray appearances. Now this is a real-life scenario. You might not put the effort into adding an appearance to every single component in your assembly. If everything is gray and it's just made out of metal, why do you care what appearance it is in your SOLIDWORKS documents? Right? So we can just easily add appearances to all of these. Right? So right here I'm seeing that this appearance is applied to quite a bit in here. I'll just go ahead and make this a metal. The fastest way to get everything to look the same and to look realistic. I'll just go ahead and make that a little darker, and that looks good. Now we've also got this green here. This green component, it's a little component inside here. Let's go ahead and make these also a metal. And you can increase their roughness. We can't even see it, but I know that I don't need green. That's for sure. So now these plates look a lot more realistic. Right? We've got this set of materials back here. It's a little dark, so we can rotate the environment to brighten that up a little bit. This doesn't look very real. This is just a plastic. This needs to be metal. let's go ahead and just drag over our gunmetal. That looks better. Now we've got this here. This is also just our paint. This here, this is a white material that is added to the Baker logo. All we have to do is come over and change that to whatever we'd like as well. Right? Clear coat and roughness. Get it looking the way you want. So now, if you have the appearances you want, we can just copy paste them between things. So let's try out a little bit more of that gunmetal. We'll put it on each of these, and we can just rapid fire through this process. Alright, and then we have these in here. These are all the little bearings, so I'll go ahead and just change this to be metal, and we'll increase that roughness and decrease that color just a bit. Now I can tell what other colors I have hanging out because we've got this yellowish look here. I'll just change this to a metal as well and change my color. So as we've been changing these appearances and dragging and dropping new ones on, we actually can get rid of some of these. And the way to do that is to right click on the background here and click on Delete All Unused Appearances and Textures. That will let you know what else you have to dial in. So let's see. We've got a lot of small internal components. I can see some gray in here. This one right here. Let's make that the same color as this. Right? And we'll do that as well. Right click, delete all unused appearances, and you'll see that go away. Now it looks like there's another component in there that's out of my reach. Just to take the shortcut, we'll go ahead and just turn that to metal and give that a darker look. Alright. Now what else remains? We come over, we can see, when we click on these, we can see where they're applied. That's fine. And that's fine. So I like what we're working with right now. There's a lot more that we can do, and then we're going to cover in this presentation, so we might as well stop right here. Now that we've got our appearances dialed in, we can start focusing on the lighting scenes. So how do we manage all of the light and illumination inside a Visualize project? Well, it's actually pretty simple. We don't need to go and put together a whole photo studio like a photographer would. We just need to use what are called HDR environments. Now, these are just spherical images that project all the light onto the model, and there's loads of them available in the SOLIDWORKS Visualize library. Now, with these environments, we can just iterate and mess around and keep switching between them until we get the desired look, but we can also adjust many settings of these environments. We've got brightness, we've got the size of the environment, we have a floor if you're trying to project something sitting on a floor, rotating the environment. All of these have direct impacts on all of the light that is bouncing and reflecting on the model. So without further ado, let's take a look at how we can use these environments to put this rendering over the top with amazing lighting, shadows, and reflections. With our appearances applied, let's now look into the lighting scene. In Visualize, it's actually very easy to achieve a great high-quality lighting scene because we can utilize HDR environments, which are essentially just spheres that surround our model and project light onto them. You're seeing all of these lights here. All of these came from SOLIDWORKS, and I do not have a use for them. This is the background from SOLIDWORKS, and this is a scene from SOLIDWORKS. I don't need any of this because I know that we have better things, or at least more appropriate things, available to us right within Visualize. Now, everything changed in terms of its look. That's because we have an environment that came in the default project called High Contrast Ramp. And this actually looks fantastic. It might be the one we end up choosing. High contrast refers to the fact that it's a grayscale, monochrome, white to black, high contrast image. If we zoom out, we can see that this is actually just a sphere And that sphere has those different colors which produce those reflections and everything else that we see. Alright, now we can experiment with other environments as well. We just have to access them from the library. Now, I had this previously on appearances. All we have to do is click on this drop down and choose environments. And then we can just drag and drop these in. So for instance, auto photo shoot, we can drag that in. Looks okay. Try out Chrome Studio, drag this one in. Ooh, I like it. I like it a lot. So we're actually going to stop there. It's a short part of this presentation because it's easy to do. So let's take a look back at the Scenes tab. We can remove the two scenes that we're not using, just so we don't have anything extra. And now let's look at just some of the settings, if we need to adjust any. When we click on the environment, you'll see this General tab, and we have a couple choices. Well, one of them is background type. It looks kind of good right now, but I'd rather have a solid color background. So we just choose color, and you can click right here if you want to change that color. I like a nice kind of dark gray, so we'll go like that. Now beyond that, you also have the brightness of the environment. Now this is how bright those white parts are in that environment we saw. I kind of liked it right at 1. You can also rotate the environment so it moves around the model, and you'll see the light bounce off of this from different directions. Right? That looks pretty cool. You also have an Advanced tab. So this Advanced tab allows us to adjust other things like gamma. Now you can see how that impacts the overall look. Lower gamma is a little bit higher saturation. We don't really have to worry about the size and the height because this is not an environment that includes a background of trees or a room or something like that. If it looks good, we're pretty much all set. But just to cover the last few things, this is the rotation slider, and then we have a shadow intensity setting for the ground. Okay, I can drag this up and you'll see a darker shadow appear. I'm actually not interested in shadows at all, so I'm going to turn that off. And here we are. So lighting, it can be difficult to achieve in software programs where you have to set things up like a photographer. But here in Visualize, we've got the ease of just choosing one of those HDR environments. You can experiment with different ones, change a few of their values and properties, and eventually end up with a high quality result. It turns out that lighting the model in the perfect way was only a few clicks. Those HDR environments are so well suited for these renderings that it makes the job much easier than it ever used to be. With that all settled, now we should talk about cameras. So understanding how cameras work on a deep level is going to help you not only just get the camera into position, but also if you want to eventually animate, these tools that we're going to cover are going to significantly help you. So we're going to look at moving the camera using a variety of different tools. You have SOLIDWORKS controls, you have manual controls, a lot of buttons and sliders, and we're going to cover all of them. Included with that, we're also going to look at some of the filtering and post-processing effects. So cameras are capable of more than just being at a location and pointing at something. They can also add effects like depth of field, and if you have Visualize Pro, we can use things like bloom and post-processing effects. So let's see how that ends up looking. With the lighting scene taken care of, we can now look into the camera options. In Visualize, we've got the same controls to rotate, pan, and zoom as we do in SOLIDWORKS. We also have a few controls right up at the top here to help us more manually. Panning, zooming, and rotating. Also twist, which will twist the entire model. And then we have look at, which will reassign our rotation point. We'll turn that off, and let's look at the camera tab itself. With our camera selected that we currently have active, we can see that we have an aspect ratio of 4:3. This is what gives us this square. If we wanted to, we could change this to be another ratio. If this is going to end up being on a television, for instance, you would choose 16:9. Alright? I'll keep it at 4:3. It's nice and big, but you can choose whatever you'd like. You also have options whether it's orthographic or with perspective. Perspective allows me to add forced perspective. Orthographic is not the case. This is how it looks in SOLIDWORKS when you're on a drawing and you have those orthographic projected views. This is nice, but it's not as realistic because we've removed the perspective that is natural when we look at objects. So we also have a lot of transformation tools here. These affect many of the things that you can affect when you are just scrolling, zooming, and panning. Notice how drastically that moved in and out. That's because these dials, they move in larger increments compared to this right here. If you click and drag from left to right, you'll notice that it's a smaller, smoother increment that it moves. So we've got longitude, latitude, and all these others, but I actually have a better way to show you how those work. What I'll do is I'll create another camera. And you can create brand new cameras from here, right on this plus sign, and click New Camera. Now, new cameras come in at a specific zoom, so that's why it's very small. And it's also come in at the 16:9 ratio. So I could have just copied this if I wanted to keep the same ratio, but you should see how this works. Right, so now we can see that nice and up close as we want. What I'll do is come over to the other side, select this camera, and I'll turn on my object manipulation tools. This will show me where that camera is in space. So I can also click on the camera options, transform, and I can click this option for show the camera positioning in the viewport. This does a great job of illustrating what's actually happening when we twist and turn these dials. So, distance dolly is the distance to the focal point. Longitude will circle around it. Latitude is up and down. Twist, we'd have to look a little closer, but this is as if you're turning your phone or camera, portrait to landscape. 0 is right in the middle. And you also just have position. Whoa, this goes wild. Right? We can zoom out and see where that camera is. There it is. You also have height from floor, floor distance, and focal height. Now, you're probably not going to be in here adjusting these all day because, again, most of the work is usually done just by rotating, zooming, and panning. We'll go ahead and turn that off, and let's talk about some of the filters. So I would consider depth of field to be a filter, but technically it's not. It's an effect of a lens, and this is actually available to both SOLIDWORKS Visualize Standard and Professional users. So you do not need Visualize Professional to access this tool. Now, how does this work? Well, let's get nice and close like this. What I'll do is click on Enable Depth of Field. For this one, Enable Depth of Field. And it gets blurry. That's because there's now a focal distance that is out of range. What we do is we click on Pick, and we can choose, I'll choose the Baker logo right here. And now this logo becomes in focus while everything that as it goes further from that logo will become blurry. You can increase that effect by increasing the aperture, and you'll see that as I go really high, everything becomes blurry, but the logo stays in focus. I'd say this is a really nice product shot. So let's go ahead and keep this one. I'll click on here and I'll name this logo. Now let's go ahead and duplicate this camera. You can hold the Control key and tap the D key, and that does a nice little duplicate. Now let's talk about some of the filters. So this is stuff that you can only do in Visualize Professional. We have filters that are post-processing tools. So post-processing by definition means that it's usually done after the initial processing of the rendering. So you do not need Visualize Professional to achieve these looks, because you can use a third-party software, some are free, to add similar types of changes to the rendering. All right, but what am I talking about? Well, let's click on Enable Post-Processing, and we can do things like darken the image. Sometimes it needs to just update a little bit. You can lighten the brighter areas of the image, saturate it, change the exposure. Changing the exposure helps out quite a bit. Maybe oversaturate it just a little bit, give it a nice pop. You can try out the overall brightness of the image. Same thing goes if you drag in these little boxes, it's much more gradual. And then you also have bloom. So bloom is going to add a little bit of a halo to where the most reflective bright areas on this model are. You can increase or decrease a threshold. If you have it all the way down, even the non-shiny parts start to bloom. You drag it up, it'll be the opposite. It'll only be the brightest areas. And you can increase intensity. We're not really seeing a ton. If you want to see that even more, we come over and we can increase the brightness. Right? You start to see that. I kind of like that. So we come over to camera. These are all of the post-processing tools that SOLIDWORKS Visualize Professional affords us. And we can see the difference between this one and this one. Pretty subtle. Sometimes that subtlety makes the difference. With cameras under our belt, we can now focus on the final topic, which is action. And by action, I mean animation. We're going to make our parts move. Now, Visualize Professional is required in order to access any of these animation tools, so keep that in the back of your head. But with SOLIDWORKS Visualize Professional, we can import motion studies from SOLIDWORKS, and we can also animate directly within the Visualize interface. We can animate a bunch of things. We can animate models, groups, and parts all independently. We can animate environments, cameras, and appearances. All of these can be animated all at once to create a beautiful and dynamic animation. So let's get started. With SOLIDWORKS Visualize Professional, you're able to export motion studies along with the model into Visualize. This gets a lot of complex work done in a very short period of time because we use our engineering tool for what it's worth. We've got all of our subassemblies, all of our mates, all of that intelligence built in, and we can easily create exploded views and turn those into motion studies. So that's exactly what I've done here. And we'll just play through it. And we'll see that the cover will come off, and then we have components progressively coming out. So all of what we're seeing here can be brought right over to Visualize, and we do that by exporting Advanced. However, this time when we export Advanced, we're going to choose Motion Study 1. So I'll click on that and click OK. It'll evaluate that, and then it will export it over to Visualize. The motion study is now imported along with the model to this project in Visualize. I can go ahead and expand my timeline, which you'll have access to in Visualize Professional. What we're seeing here are animated groups, and those correlate to groups in our model tree. Every group that has a red dot has been animated and is essentially moving at one point within the animation. So each one of these that has a red dot has a correlating row right here. We can scroll all the way through this and see all of those components that are moving. So all of that exploding was done just with the motion study, and we can play through that. I'll just go ahead and click play, and you'll see those come off progressively. Now, these are all the groups that are being animated, we can go ahead and animate other aspects of this model as well. For instance, we can go and animate the model. As long as it doesn't already have a red dot, you're okay to animate it. So I'll add a cool animation to this, which is a rotation animation. Now what this does is it adds a new line at the bottom, and it has this rotating. Now I'm going to have it rotate the entire length of this animation. You can double click on these and wake up properties. I can click on the endpoint and tell it to be, at this moment here, 20 seconds. And now what we see is the model rotating as everything explodes. Alright, so if I zoom out, we'll be able to get a better idea of what's happening here. Right, so we've got some really cool compound motion with only a few steps. And we can also change the lead in and lead out speed. So if I come over into the properties of this, you've got easing in and easing out. This is where it's going to ramp up in speed and ramp down at the beginning and end of its rotation. We can also change the rotation angle. You can have it more than 360, or I can do 180, or maybe even just 90. And then what you'll see, I'll just play it, is it will slowly rotate across those 20 seconds. All right, let's maybe make that 180. And you'll see it go 180 degrees. Now let's also do another thing. We can animate on a level lower than groups. Parts exist within groups. And if I click on this part right here, we can see we have got this part, and that looks like it's it. So we've got two parts that we can animate because they don't have red dots. So what we'll do is have them fade out as this opens. How do we do that? Well, let's just keep it right here. I'll take these two, right click, and then we can animate this. Add keyframe. And it creates two new lines. Then we'll have it at 2 seconds be completely faded. And all we have to do is change their opacity property to be 0. So what we've done is we've animated the parts fading while the group that contains those parts is animated by the SOLIDWORKS motion study. Now as far as other work, we can also animate the camera. So if I come in, we can come over to the camera. I can right click on a camera and add a keyframe to that, and we'll see that pop up. Right now, if we want the camera to animate across this time period, we can just drag this bar to the end and then move the camera wherever we'd like. Now I think this rotation should be the 90 degrees because I don't need it to go so far, but let's just see what this camera animation has provided us. Alright, looks like we need to change this up. So we can just delete the camera animation, or you can delete keys that you've created. You right click on the keys that you don't want and you delete the selected keyframe. So this animation is rotating this way. Let's go ahead and start with our camera. Here, let's actually grab a brand new camera. I'll do a brand new one. That way we're starting completely from scratch. Alright, so we're going to actually animate this camera. Right click, add keyframe, and now we'll just go ahead and move up like this. So as it's rotating and exploding, the camera is going to go up and we get this extremely dynamic looking animation. Alright, so that's how we animate in Visualize Professional. I included a motion study. We went through and we animated the model to rotate, and we went through and we animated the camera to pivot up, and we also animated a few parts to fade away as that cover comes off. So all within a couple minutes, we achieved a really dynamic animation, and I'll go ahead and throw on the screen right now the finished animation with all of the appearances applied. So that animation was pretty cool, but we've also covered a lot of information, so let's do a quick recap. We started by talking about importing files to Visualize. We can do that either from SOLIDWORKS with the add-in or in Visualize using those profiles for part grouping. We also then went into appearances, talked about the different categories and some strategies for applying them to a model that might not have had all the appearances detailed in the SOLIDWORKS model. Then we went into light, and we examined some HDR environments and the properties to make our model look that much better. We also went into cameras and how our camera can be moved around and have filters added to it to give us that extra little bit of drama and impact in our rendering. And then we just went through the animation. How cool was that, right? With just a few clicks, we were able to get a motion study from SOLIDWORKS right into Visualize. We then went the extra mile and animated the parts fading out as it exploded. We also went through and we animated the camera. And we also animated the model level too, where we had that rotate. So all of that dynamic motion and things happening at the same time truly produced what looked like a professional level animation in a very short period of time. So thank you very much for joining this presentation today. Again, my name is Chris Mowat. I'm a rendering expert, or at least I like to think I am. So if you are interested at all in any of these topics, please reach out. I love talking to people of similar mind. Those that love rendering are friends of mine. Have a great day, and I hope to see you again.